I recently had the chance to catch up with the audio engineers from the jazz fusion band Snarky Puppy, and I wanted to talk to them specifically about the audio production behind the latest album called Empire Central. I heard a couple of the songs off of the Empire Central album on YouTube. 19 musicians, all in the same room, recorded live, no overdubs, no multi-tracking, and they're playing in front of an audience who are listening in on headphones. It's masterfully recorded and engineered. The tracks sound like a studio album, even though it's all recorded live. So I was really keen to have a chat with these guys and see how they pulled off such an incredible sounding album. So I highly recommend, if you haven't heard any of these songs yet, search Empire Central by Snarky Puppy on YouTube. Check out some of these recordings so you have a little context for the discussion that follows. The guys on the call are Nic Hard, who mixed the album, Matthew Recchia, who joined a little later on in the call, and Mike Harrison, who regularly mixes front of house for Snarky Puppy live shows. Nick was in Spain at the time, Mike Harrison was in the UK, and Matt Recchia was in the US. But huge thanks to them for still catching up with me, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. So I guess for our listeners, would you mind just kind of setting up how a Snarky Puppy recording is different from tracking your average 4 or 5 piece band?
Well, it's chaos to begin with and to end with, and every point in between. How would you expand on that, Nick?
I mean, just the sheer number of people is already makes it very different than most sessions. There are 19 in this one, 19 guys, and having 3 drummers on anything is, I mean, that's already more channels, more inputs than normal recording is.
Yeah.
So I mean, just by volume, it's more complicated. And then you get into things like the headphone mixes and stuff like that.
It's the same on output world as well. It's equally complex, if not more.
Yeah. So I mean, trying to make sure that the 19 people are happy, is also tricky.
For sure. Yeah, and then there's the added complexity of, tracking a Snarky Puppy album. I think what people associate that with instantly is they're all in this room together playing live. It's not like multi-tracked in the studio.
Yeah, I mean, so this record is the first one of these that I've done with Snarky. So the 2 other albums I did with him were studio albums. I mean, we're still, still a band in a room, but there was more isolation, and stuff like that. But this is essentially, these songs are all one take, no overdubs and stuff like that. So that actually is a little bit simpler in a way.
Yeah.
And obviously that comes with some, performance things that maybe could have been better, but Mike likes to leave that kind of stuff in.
Yeah.
For the most part. But I mean, it's definitely like an interesting way to do it. And the other thing that makes it more complicated in this scenario is then the audience. And having Harrison was in charge of doing a custom mix specifically for the audience, to get it sort of sounding like a record for them to enjoy. So that's a whole other thing that's not normally present,
For sure. Yeah, because because it is like a show as well as a recording, but instead of front of house, you're mixing headphone mix for the audience. So it's kind of like the 2 combined, the live concert feeling, but with the precision of a studio recording.
You've got an immediate difficulty there, though. We've got some very kind friends at Audio Technica. They sponsor us with all sorts of nice microphones and headphones for these things. See, I'm sporting a pair just now. Problem is, though, we're still using these ones for the musicians. They're the AT50s. They're very good. We were using, I think it was the AT20s or 30s for the audience.
Right.
They don't quite have the same isolation or kind of weight behind the mix that you give them. So normally I'm mixing in, it's pretty expensive front of house system, even from a small club through to like an auditorium, you get somewhere between $50,000 and $500,000 worth of speakers there. Here you've got a $50 set of retail cans for. So you're trying to put a lot of information into some very small, sonic boxes. So that was like the biggest compromise. Just trying to keep the dynamic of the bands performing live and not just have it, crushed.
Yes, for sure.
But you've still actually got like a very narrow kind of letterbox that you can fit it in. The frequency response needs to be curtailed. Yeah, it was kind of like broadcast mixing, but you're still in the midst of the band, which is not where broadcast folk tend to like to be. Yeah.
I was thinking even just with the dynamics of a band like Snarky Puppy, where they are often riffing off each other, and it matters that they're vibing. Nailing the monitor mixes in their headphones would be incredibly important, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So is Matt on monitors?
Matt is.
Yeah, there's a hybrid of. So basically, the whole setup is based on a studio setup, because it's still it's like directly halfway in between a studio album and a live album. But so we had a headphone system, the hearback technologies, that you find in a lot of studios, so that the band has some control.
Right.
But within that, there was some submixing, and we needed Matt to basically be there to adjust some of those submixes and things like that. There was still a lot of demand from the band. So we definitely needed to have somebody
very
on
much receiving like prepared stems by Matt. We've got 128 channels coming in. They're only going to receive like a stripped down number to make it easier to navigate. But it wasn't like we were missing out microphones. He was given them prepared group mixes and isolated musician mixes as well, so they could blend between, I want the horns as a group, but I want more of this keyboard, for example. That's the kind of splitting up he was doing.
Right.
Quite how he was doing it, I'm not sure. That's his forte. It was very much like a reduction to give them an easier palette to work with as quickly as they could on their hearback systems.
Yeah. So 128 input channels, you said?
Yes.
Yeah, two 64-way stage racks.
Yeah. Okay. And I noticed there are like multiple mics on different instruments. So even the horns, there's like a few different mics. Was that like an Audio-Technica ribbon you've got on there? And then you're using some Latin audio mics as well.
Yeah.
In the mix. So what's the reasoning behind different mics on the same instrument? Is that just for the tonal option?
So it's treating this as a normal studio situation, and in a normal studio situation, I really like ribbons on horns.
Yeah.
So I like to have a choice and maybe a blend between the two. And in this situation, because of the everybody in the same room and the drum and the bleed stuff, I wasn't sure that ribbons were really going to cut it. So I wanted to have something else there as well. So those Loudon Audios have got a lot of rejection. So I basically had the two, so I could choose between them in mixing. I think I actually ended up using both. For most of the horn sound for each horn. So the Loudon,
I did the same in the live mix. I thought I would end up choosing one or the other, and I ended up using both. Yeah.
The isolation on the ribbons actually ended up being better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, me too.
So it was. I was expecting it to be an absolute nightmare, but it was actually pretty decent.
Right.
So then on some of the other horns, there are other microphones, but those are usually for effects or different instruments. In Chris Bullock, there's like 7 microphones or something, or 5 microphones. That's for all the different instruments he plays.
Right. Yeah, sure. So on the topic of bleed, 3 kits in a small space is already crazy. And you've got percussion, You've got horns. As for guitar amps, was that all? I saw some Kempers there. Was that to kind of minimize the
Totally.
amps in the room?
Totally. But before going into the, before the session, and in the planning of this, I mean, the space didn't have any ISOs really. And so I had a
What
meeting.
was it actually? Was it a bar? It looks like a bar.
Yeah, there's a bar with a venue
Right.
thing.
And it's already treated, or did you put up some treatment?
I mean, it's not really treated. Their ceiling was acoustically treated, I guess, just for live music, but we didn't really do any extra stuff acoustically. So it just sort of as it was, but it was relatively under control.
We carpeted the area so it wasn't a big floor.
Right, but some of that was aesthetic too.
When we were actually checking things or having musicians playing, like the drums when they first came in, my heart just fell when I heard the drum sound. It's like, oh no. And there was a bare wall behind the drums and some bare floor and some other pockets of the room that were like that. And there was just so much cross bounce and smash between things, especially when I opened up horn mics, percussion mics. I was really discouraged. Put 100, 120 people in there, and they're actually covering up the bare areas, all your drum sound that comes flying backwards from the drummer when they're playing the cymbal smash and the snare crack. It's not actually reaching the wall. It's hitting those drum geeks straight in the face. Those guys like that, fine, but thanks, it's just benefited the record because you're not. Yeah. It's amazing what filling up the blank spaces with people actually does, as long as they're relatively quiet. So, I remember that helping immensely. I did not like the sound of the room when it was just the musicians in it, but when the people came in, everything settled down. We didn't have that.
Yeah.
Traction around.
Right. And then just to kind of refine everything, check all the mics, make sure positions are right, check the monitoring mixes. Was that just done while the band was rehearsing in the space in the days leading up to the recording?
There was like we had 2.5 days for setup, and they started rehearsing like halfway through the second day or something like that.
We had about a day. One full day because we came in like about 10 o'clock one night, put the initial equipment in and just pushed it into place.
Right.
The full next day, just setting up. And
then they came in halfway through the next day.
Following day people were in there by 2 p.m. and I think by the end of that day we'd gone round the circle and got everybody's lines and basics dialed in.
Right.
And like at the end of that day, they hit it as a band.
Yeah. It was pretty smooth setup, I have to say.
Yeah, that's Matt. That's Matt.
Yeah. So I probably should have asked this earlier, but what exactly were your individual roles in the production process?
What do you mean by production? Just the sort of titles?
Yeah, and just what you were doing in the recording and mixing phases and what your involvements were, what your responsibilities were.
Gotcha. Well, I was sort of in charge of designing the overall like scheme of things, like what we were going to use for consoles and microphones and the headphone system and organizing that stuff ahead of time. And then during the actual thing, I was in charge of pressing record on the two computers.
You even had an assistant for that as well.
I did have an assistant for that as well. On the secondary rig, just in case. And then Harrison, this is sort of all after the setup thing. We all sort of chipped in for that, but after Harrison was doing the mix for the audience, and Recchia was in charge of making sure the band is still happy. And then during that, in between songs, Recchia and I would have to run out to the percussion setup and change microphone positions.
Right.
We had maybe like 20 microphones assigned for percussion, but they had 50 different possibilities of stuff that they could play. So we sort of learned through the rehearsal, what they were going to be playing on which songs, and then we sort of would run out and have to change that stuff in between songs.
Wow.
Yeah. Like Matt and I, our roles kind of port directly from the live scene. Obviously, Nic is chief architect of the recording and what we're going to record, what we're going to catch for his future purposes of mixing it.
Yeah.
Matt and I's roles coming from kind of live. He is obviously looking after the monitors, which the musicians are doing themselves in part, and basically planning, an absolute, shitfest, pardon my language, of cabling in this room. And to his credit, we only came up with like one cross patch on a stereo pair or something in the whole setup. There was no, where is this signal? We don't know. There's 300 places it could be. None of that came up. So that's his architecture of like running a very complex stage. He also works in film and television as well. So
yeah,
cabling, he's very, very particular about that. It's not seen, it's not interfered with. It all goes the correct place, the easiest way. So he's like stage manager on stage. So he took that role into a horrendously large recording session. Myself, as Nic said, he specified a set of headphone amplifiers, like stereo in 8 or 16 ways out, so we could put them in nests for people around the room. So my output chain is fairly simple. It's left-right stereo, but then it's going 120 ways.
Yeah.
So like my role on stage when Matt's doing all the stage stuff in live world is I do all the system stuff. Large venue, lots of zones with speakers. Making sure even his monitor system is firing correctly before we get to work. That's, everything that starts with a console taking the signal and ends up putting it somewhere else. Me. So even on a nightly basis or in between sets, when we change around for a fresh audience pair, sure, I'm just hitting reset in my console, but I've got to go and check the gain structure on 120 sets of outputs, to try and put them back in that neutral place.
Yes.
So we don't start the session and one lot of people are going, oh, it's too loud, and another lot of people inherited somebody's very conservative settings from the last session are going, we can't hear, we can't. What's going on? So just to put everything back at a kind of unity gain structure ahead of the next session. That was just, the largest ads I'd ever dealt with in terms of like headphone splits and outputs and things.
Yeah.
I had a few teething problems, but next choices worked out well, I think, in the end of the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have an S6L. There were two of them. Two of them in the end. One for Harrison to make the mix for the audience, and then another one for so that, I mean, it's all the same stuff and controlling the same things, but basically just so that we weren't stepping on each other's toes. We had
for sure.
Two consoles. Otherwise, it would have been chaos.
Totally.
Yeah.
Is there much effects going on in the mix you were sending to the audience, or was it more just pulling a good balance of all the inputs?
You're doing some stuff.
No, there's when I mix live, I'm a big advocate of lots of reverb. Well chosen, but I use a lot of reverb, and like there's certain places Nic does, I hear in the albums as well. Things can be quite heavily saturated and spacious sounding. So yeah, that was kind of one of the ways we got around kind of like dry sounds or bleeds and things, is you can do a lot to make an instrument sound suddenly very large without actually taking up a lot of space in the mix, just by using like an explosive reverb. There was one you suggested I dial in on Belmont, yeah. we've got a second snare in every drum set that's very deep and heavy and normally dry sounding. It's like a big deep crunch. And in this case, we broke with the kind of normally dry sounds and basically threw it down a well. In about 4 or 5 seconds of heavy reverb, because it's a very slow kind of deep kind of ballad sound. So it's just lingers for a long time. That was a nice departure from the norm. Just one effect.
Yeah.
And as I said, I use reverb and brass instruments, percussion instruments pretty liberally anyway. It makes them sound alive and not or face. I'm sure Nick's get his comments.
Yeah. I think we sort of tried to treat the audience mix as a studio mix would be, and sort of did as much as we could do with the not being able to sort of stop things and sort of doing things on the fly.
Yeah.
But, it was there was a bunch of stuff happening.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess what really stands out to me is how it's almost like this dissonance between watching the video and seeing how much is packed into one space, and then listening to the audio and it's so clean and tight and like well isolated, and instruments are like still smacking you in the face in a way that you wouldn't expect when there's that much potential for bleed and spill. So I guess, Nic, when you were setting up mics and designing the whole front end, were you like very intentional about making sure you were minimizing bleed and spill? I know the Lapins are known for super high directionality. Is that why you chose them? That kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that dictated a lot of choices, like the overheads for the drum kits are hyper cardioids, and I was sort of walking a fine line between what I do in the studio and knowing that there was going to be all of this bleed. But as you said, like with the the Kempers, I got all the guitar players to use Kempers so that we didn't have that issue happening. So basically it was just between the horns, drums, and percussion, really. And then actually even with those ribbon mics on the horns, they sort of reject out of the side. So that's why the horn players were perpendicular to the drum sets, more or less. And then with the mics that are over in percussion, we were using ones where we could change the pickup patterns, so to suit different instruments in the direction that they're going. There was a decent amount of thought put into that stuff.
The ribbon mics and the horns, like we both said earlier, it worked out better than we both expected. And if you think about a horn player addressing like a ribbon mic, the nulls are going to be like in 90 and 270. So the drums were off the horn player's shoulders. They were in a line. The nulls are pointing at the drums. The second live side of the ribbon mic, which doesn't have a horn facing directly into it, is going to be relatively insensitive now. And it was facing keyboard world, so there wasn't a lot of noise coming from that direction either. So it really did. The Loudons were fantastic. We chased down like hypercardioid mics and mics with high rejection for live use. And then first off, I thought the Loudons were brilliant, but I was surprised how much the Audio-Technicas did not lose to them. They held up in figure of 8 mode. It was really, like Nic said, we could use both of them. And one of the things I did between sessions was just go around and make sure they were aligned, like as microscopically as I could get it, so you don't have phase issues with one having drifted an inch forwards of another when the microphone stand sags or takes a little nudge or something. So sorry, I'm pretty pretty anal about these things. Yeah.
Do you have any reflections on the recording looking back? Any particular amazing feats that you're just super proud of? You know,
that it all worked.
Yeah,
I guess that is, it's a pretty big deal, really, isn't it?
Yes, I said that when you patched it all up, first time in 128 channels. I think we had like one pair back to front or something like that, one stereo pair, but we'd know where is the signal issues.
We had that one bank of like 16 channels that was kind of like a little bit of a headache, but that was about it.
Okay, yeah.
I think at that point,
I don't know if I told you two guys that during mixing, Mike kept saying that this was the smoothest Snarky record ever, studio album or live. It was the least painful. So that's
there's probably the most inputs of any of them too, right? Other than Silva, maybe.
Yeah.
Going to be narcissistic here. It was the first one that you had both Matt and I. All other occasions it's been you and or Hartman and one of us. So,
gotcha. Yeah. Well, that definitely helps.
And the secret ingredient with Skylar to help you push record twice as well. So
yeah.
I think how fast they got up and running too for like rehearsals, because we only had that basically like a day to put the whole studio together, and even at that point they were kind of coming in and wanting to do stuff. So I think that was pretty.
Yeah.
That was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, set up day 2 suddenly became set up for them and sound check and rehearsal. Like halfway through the day, very suddenly. So okay, we're ready. We're going already.
Were there any songs where you had to do multiple takes?
Well, basically over the 8 days, there were 2 sets per day. And so no song was ever repeated once in a set. So there was never like 2 takes in a row of the same song. So it was just the songs were picked from, Mike went back and listened to everything and say like one song came from like the second set of night 4 and a different one. So he just sort of went and found the best one. So there was never like, in rehearsal, there was, before the sets, there was, a couple hours of rehearsal and they'd worked through some things. But yeah, there was never while the audience was there, a redo or anything.
Sure. Okay.
I think there might have been 1 or 2 false starts somewhere along the way, but
maybe
there was no kind of car crash. We've got to start this again or get to the end of it and repeat. Like Nick says, that's what the latter nights were for. We've got 8 repeats of every song to choose from, or 6 repeats or something.
Yeah. Wow, it's a real like high stakes, high reward style of tracking an album, isn't it? But I guess the payoff is just that feeling of it coming together. I imagine the adrenaline's running pretty high just before you hit record on every song.
Yeah, well, this we're rolling, from the minute the audience walks in, and just let the computer go.
Yeah,
and in that way, it's more like the live show. It's like once it's going, it's going. Aside from moving the microphones in between songs, so there's like a couple minutes, in between each song. But aside from that, it was just sort of, going.
Let it run.
Yeah.
That's probably the easiest way to actually make it feel calm, I think, is to keep it in show mode.
Yes.
If you thought of it too much like a session, the energy drops, your concentration and your delivery drops as a musician and as an engineer as well. If you're trying to mix it there and then, that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
So to keep it in show mode kind of keeps you calm.
Yeah.
I had a bleed of the combined room mics, which didn't feature a lot during songs. I would fade them down, but between songs and when Mike was talking, and even when the audience entered, I had the headphones on and the room ambience up, so you put on the headphones, you felt like you're in a room. I felt that was like less disturbing to put on a dry set of headphones, and it worked for me as well when I'm sitting waiting at the console. You don't get as nervous if you're shut out and waiting for things to happen. It's I can hear what's going on over there.
Yeah,
it has a kind of calming effect, just being in show mode. You know,
for sure.
I would say there was definitely some moments of like, oh crap, when we were moving those mics around Percussion World. I'm like, did we get that? Did we put it on the right? Like,
oh god,
did we feature the right cowbell on this song, or did we, like that kind of?
And also, I think Marcelo kept changing what he was playing too.
Yeah.
Welcome to our life.
You had to remind him what instrument he was supposed to be. He was hitting the time before, and
yeah.
No, my microphone's over here. Shake it up here, please. Not down by your hip where there's no microphone. That works. That works in a live stage. It doesn't work here.
Yeah, I guess from watching the videos, it seems pretty clear that there was plenty of energy in the room, even though it was through headphones. Like there was an actual front of house rig. So yeah, those room mics must have worked a treat to still produce that sensation of it's live, it's happening, it doesn't feel too dead.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Like if you're monitoring in a dead environment, and I think Nic holds the same feelings, but going forward to making a record from it, you need the feel of a room to actually make it sound authentic and live and real. Just keep that short.
Yeah. So I'd be keen to talk a little bit about mixing. I guess, again, what stands out to me from listening to Trinity and Bet is obviously there are so many channels and there's so much to be mixed, but it still sounds like every instrument has its place. So what I'm keen to explore with you, Nic, is like, are you picking the hero of every moment of every song and then the support act around the hero and just kind of like bringing those in at different parts? Or was your goal all along, it's like, we've got 90 musicians, they all need to be heard 100% of the time?
I mean, there's obviously for things like solos and things like that, there's definitely some, writing up in volume of some things and some featuring of certain parts. But I mean, the goal really is, with this kind of music is to have, everything be heard and be represented well. I mean, a lot of it in this case, a lot of the sounds, the quality of the sounds really comes down to the guys and the musicians, like especially with like drum sounds. The number one way to get a good drum sound is to use a good drummer.
And a good drum.
Yeah, and then after that, it's like the tuning on the drums, and then it's the room that it's in. Then it's like microphones and the audio gear. But so having like these three guys playing drums, it's pretty straightforward to get the drums to sound good. But as far as the mix and blending all of them, I mean, there's definitely a lot of thought that goes into the EQ and the general sort of the way that these things interact with each other, and trying to keep stuff heard throughout, but then obviously like featuring things when they need to be featured. So then there's a lot of automation as well. But I mean, in this instance, I approached it as as a studio album, and so in some cases we're like reamping guitars and adding effects, and not being too precious with it having to be totally represented, but also not looking or sounding weird with the video.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Is a lot of that under Michael's direction, or do you kind of have creative license there to a fair degree?
No, I mean, I have whether I have license or not, I'll definitely take liberties. And I'll definitely like try a bunch of stuff, and then me and Mike have a good relationship where then he'll just want to dial it back. Usually, in most cases, occasionally he'll want to push things a little harder. yeah, no, I mean, basically I'll sort of go through and do a first pass of a mix, and then we'll sit together and work on it and whatnot.
Yeah.
But yeah, this process for this album was pretty straightforward. I mean, it didn't go too crazy with effects and things. I was mixing. I had a rough cut of the video for these songs, so I was basically mixing with the video at the same time.
Right.
So I could kind of see when things were looking weird, which was helpful.
Yeah. So I guess like when you first approach the session, you've got 128 channels there, recorded tracks. What's your process of, making room, making space, figuring out where everything sits? Do you start with EQ, start with levels, compression?
The first thing is actually editing out bleed,
right,
which is like massively important. So this is, in a case where Harrison would be using a gate, I'll go and do it manually because we have the luxury of doing that. And actually, Mike did a bunch of this editing himself before I got up there. So because it's, I mean, with 128 channels, it's a long process, and it would take half a day to edit this stuff. So Mike was sort of doing that as I was mixing a song. He'd be editing the next one. But yeah, that's the first thing is the sort of the cleanup and getting rid of the bleed. Which when it came to the percussion stuff was sometimes a little bit hard to tell. Which microphone was more useful and which one had more bleed and stuff. So that was sort of the next thing, was sort of making a choice of which microphones and making a choice about, like with the horns, whether I was going to use both mics or one mic and things like that. And then after that, then it's usually like EQ, again, EQ for the purpose of like cleaning, for the purpose of getting rid of like low end, that's not needed, or things like that. And once things have been like appropriately cleaned, then it's about sort of EQing for the way they fit together.
Yeah. What are your go-to EQ plugins?
I use the FabFilter Pro Q3.
Yeah.
Like on almost everything. Just because it's super versatile and basically can do so many things that I need it to do. And then if I want something with a bit more color, then I'll go to like a Neve, emulation or something like that. But sort of for basic cutting and stuff, I'll use the FabFilter thing.
Yeah.
There is actually going to be a pure mix video about the album and about the mixing process as well.
Oh, cool.
Which will happen at some point, but there it'll be like fully in depth. I'm basically talking through every plugin choice.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Look forward to that. Yeah.
Every aspect.
Dude, everything. I'd like go to do something, and then Fab would be like, "Oh, why are you doing that? Like, explain, why you're using that plugin, why, what you're hearing." So, I mean, it was a really interesting process to sort of go through, because I mean, half the time I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just sort of, making it up as I go along.
Like, yeah, it looks cool.
Yeah. There's a couple of those.
A lot of it is instinctive, isn't it? Like, kind of muscle memory. But that's what makes every engineer's style a little bit different and all different sounds. I guess how much of a vision did you have from the outset of how you wanted it to sound?
I mean, for me, the goal was to have it sound as good as a studio album, and for it to be as creatively expressive as a studio album, but still maintain the live like energy. So sort of beyond that general sort of like vague description, I mean, that was really all that I wanted to get out of it. So yeah, any of the sort of finer things was more up to just the situation. And look, I didn't have a lot of input on the drum sets or those things, or normally in a studio recording, things are a little bit more tailored. Like I'll change out drums, or heads on drums, the tuning on drums, things like that to sort of change the sound for the songs. But in this case, because of the more live thing, just sort of let it go and just sort of tried to focus on the capturing it as best as possible.
Yeah, well, I think you guys have definitely pulled that off. It is a studio sound, but it's a live recording. I think that's definitely the impression myself and many others have gotten from the way it sounds.
Cool.
What's interesting is you guys have been working with Snarky Puppy for a long time, and I guess the concept of tracking these albums, sort of like from We Like It Here as well, just that big room, everyone's playing at the same time. That idea of tracking albums that way, and when you listen back on Spotify, you might not even know until you watch the video, oh, this was actually like in a big room and everyone was playing at the same time. You listen to the audio by itself, it could well be just a studio recording. Is that like a recording philosophy that Snarky Puppy has had intentionally from the beginning for a specific purpose? Because that is slightly unconventional, I guess, compared to how other bands might go about.
Gotcha.
I mean, I think the basis of the band's just being very, very live kind of dictated that. It began before I was involved in the band. The first two records.
Well, I think it was Mike's original. I mean, this was the brainchild of Mike League and that format of doing things in that way. But guided by the style of music.
They have two earlier albums, I think, that predate them doing that format, and they sound very different. They sound like studio albums, and then they did Tell Your Friends and Ground Up before I met them, and they were the in the room cameras audience format.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm guessing it comes down to performance and kind of monitoring issues. Nobody really wants to put things down one part at a time if you're a very live oriented band. It makes making a record sound authentic or live like a performance. It makes it a lot harder if you start with it deconstructed, whereas if you can just play it as you do 200 times a year with that band anyway, then you're going to get a result that sounds like the band's to begin with, as long as you can clean it up.
I'll say too, like when I first heard the band, it was Tell Your Friends, and I remember a friend had burned a CD and we were listening to it in his car. I was like, oh, this is pretty cool, but it wasn't until I saw it on YouTube that I was like, holy cow, this is, blazing.
Yeah.
It's awesome. And I think like Tell Your Friends and YouTube both kind of like took off at the same time. And I think like that's one of the reasons the format maybe like clicked so well and was worked, like kind of like stayed in plays, because like with YouTube and the videos, and then the Layla video getting 1 million views, and so I think it was just like a snowball effect, where you can't really once you open that door, you can't really go back almost. I mean, you can, but it's just not the same. Doesn't have the same effect. Like I would love to see some of the Culture Vulture stuff. Like I'd love to see videos for some of that stuff, because some of my favorite songs on that album. But you're like, oh, of course, me and Harrison are lucky enough to see it, but to see the actual, process of being married.
Yeah, I mean, I think with this record, the return to this format, because Immigrants and Culture Vulture were studio albums, that Mike has talked about. Coming back to this format because of the satisfaction and the sensation of making music in front of people. the way that feels. And I think he's also said like the idea for doing it this way came from wanting to have the energy of the live show, but the sound of a studio album. And I think that's, you know, because, you know, in the studio things can get stale and boring. And, you know, when you have an audience, it can be more exciting. And, you know, sometimes the mistakes are good and things like that. But, yeah, man, I think that was sort of the initial thinking behind this format. One thing that for me that I want to mention that's exciting for this record is that there's an entire Atmos version of the album that Fab DuPont and I mixed at his place in New York.
Oh wow!
Which is the first thing I've mixed in Atmos. And I have to say I was sort of went into it a little bit skeptical of like, oh, you know, there's another surround sound format that like, but you know, I think it took about an hour before I was super excited about it, and how it actually worked really well for this band, and sort of being able to expand beyond two speakers, and be immersed, you know, in the band, was really exciting, and it was a lot of fun.
Can I ask Nick a question real quick?
Yeah, of course.
Hey, so I kind of was wondering about this with like the Atmos and even the album mixes. After like having to mix the live shows and the criticism some of the fans had about how things were panned like the first few shows, like, does that ever come into your mind when you're doing the live mixes or the studio mixes? Like
no.
Did the pan's fault? No. Okay.
No, I mean, from obviously, I do think about it after Robert, a fan of the band named Robert Gask, was kind enough to point out that the live mixes were panned incorrectly. But yeah, I mean, I'll think about it, but especially in this situation, because of the camera angles, and cutting between the different cameras, the panning doesn't remain. And it's not a flat stage. It was a circle,
right.
a circle. So it wouldn't make sense to do that. So I sort of wanted to approach it more as the studio thing, and just have things, you know, fit where they can fit. And the Atmos thing was like throw everything out the window and just put things wherever you feel like it.
Right. Personally, I solve that problem and just leave the pan pot center. That's how I mix.
Right.
So I've got another world of problems. You know,
right.
Totally
Right.
I was just wondering because even like on the head, like in my little like the mix I was building for myself, I like kind of automatically went to my go-to, like, okay, I'm gonna put the horns a little bit here and the keys. And you kind of start in the same spot, or.
I mean,
actually,
I mean, more or less. More or less, except that there isn't a stage perspective, so it doesn't have to match up. So sometimes, I mean, there sort of wasn't a rule about it.
Right.
It's funny, Recchia, that you bring that up. And as I said, I ordinarily always mix in mono for live purposes, but in this case, we were mixing for headphones where everyone can get stereo, so I did pan things around, which is not normally what I do. And that debate came up in my mind because when you look at the horns here, well, this is everyone's stereo image, but then you've got another set of people who are.
Yeah.
Eventually, I just panned it. It was if you don't like it.
Yeah, just tell them to switch.
It's on your headphones around. Yeah, that was it. It was little headphone tutorials for people at the start. So.
Yeah, exactly.
That was the only solution.
Mm. Yeah, cool. I'm excited about the Atmos mix. I think Snarky Puppy's music is a bullseye for that format.
Yeah, I like I said, I was sort of skeptical, you know, being so organic and you know, a live band sort of thing. I was sort of thought that maybe some of the trickery and fanciness wouldn't suit it, but I think it really did at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it didn't go too crazy, but I do know what it sounds like now to have your head inside a Leslie cabinet.
Hey,
Yeah.
me too.
Yeah,
That's Recchia's life. Yeah.
but like this right in the center of it, right in the center of the spinning speaker is what it sounds like.
Great.
I guess to wrap up, could I grab one piece of audio engineering wisdom from each of you? No pressure.
For whom?
Folks who are tracking bands live and want to not lose the energy of a live recording, but also keep things sounding clean and punchy.
Okay.
Gotcha. I mean, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's a kind of back to basics thing, but headroom for capturing everything clean, and as Nic and Matt and I found, you can never generally have enough. So I go with, like, whether it's monitoring systems in the studio, on the stage, or in headphones, I go with them turned up, loud, so to speak, so that you have maximum capacity, maximum dynamic response from them, and keep things like our input gains low, conservative, keep our mix structure quite conservative, because things happen in a very lively session and you don't want that to disrupt your life. So I tend to set a fixed monitoring gain. This is a subject you can explore further. Fixed monitoring gain, the same way as you would do with a PA or a stage monitor. You don't turn it up or down, you leave it where it is loud, and you mix into that, and it gives you nice wide open dynamics.
Right. Yeah.
What's normally a very long conversation curtailed to that, but you know, fixed monitoring gain and having a lot of headroom at the output makes you do things the same way at the input stage. You keep things nice and low. You're not using input gain to create volume. That's my my throw in there.
Yeah. That's
I'd say for me that the game is about controlling the bleed, and whether it's with mic choice or physical placement of the instrument or treatment of the room and baffles and things like that. I mean, basically, the least or the less bleed there is, the more you're able to EQ things to sound good. So, you know, when there's a lot of bleed, it makes that sort of thing.
Yeah, you're doing damage control. Yeah. I would fully support that. Always live, studio, whatever. You know, good mic choices.
Get it right at the source.
Yeah.
I think from a monitoring perspective, I mean, obviously with headphones, you don't have the bleed issue unless, you know, certain keyboardists have their headphones at 11, but you're getting click. But I know, like for Royal Albert Hall, we did that one live, but that was with monitors in a very live setting. And I think just constant communication between the engineers, you know, like walking out to talk to Harrison, hey, is there anything coming off the stage that sounds off or weird? And, you know, when he mutes the PA out front, but it still sounds good and solid and nice, that's when you kind of, you're like, okay, well, the monitors, you know, they're in a good place. They're in a healthy place for everybody right now.
We have a lot of these kind of conversations.
It almost kind of enhances the sound coming through the microphone more so than hurts it. You know, I think it sounds good on stage. There is, of course, that bleed through the microphones, but if the bleed is good, then, you know, it kind of helps everybody. If you're getting some really bad bleed or some feedback and that kind of thing, then it's obviously detrimental to the whole process.
Yeah, it's kind of, it all feeds back in a circle. Like if Matt and I have these conversations, musicians seeing this or hearing the result on the stage, they get more confident about their performance. They deliver us more of what we need then. You know, no musician likes an uncertain sound engineering situation. No musician likes, you know, like a stressed or angry sound engineer. It just it never begins a good situation. So, like Nick says, like Matt says, if you iron these things out, if we have that feedback to make sure we're not interfering with each other's lives from headphones or from monitors, from stage sound, everyone gets the results, everyone gets the benefits.
Yeah, awesome. And do you have any desert island pieces of gear that you can't live without?
Ooh.
You can't say gaff tape.
Can I say my laptop?
Sorry, Rex.
I have a specific mic. I have like an old Beta 57 that I absolutely love and cherish and try to make sure it's in use whenever I can. That's
Nice.
about it. I think that's my like little cool mic.
Yeah. Workhorse mic.
Yeah, I mean, for me, not really. I mean, I tend to sort of use things, but if they're not available, then I'll find something else that can do the job. But I mean, yeah, really, I guess the answer is my laptop, because without that, I couldn't do any of this. 128 channels on a tape machine would be a nightmare of a mix.
Yeah. What's your laptop, Nick?
Well, I actually just got an M1.
Yeah,
one.
cool.
This record was not mixed on it. It was mixed on a 2018 Mac Mini with 48 gigabytes of RAM.
Right.
Yeah,
wow. And all in Pro Tools?
Yeah, all in Pro Tools minus. I mean, there was some, like I said, some reamping and some sending stuff to guitar pedals. Yeah, I didn't use any outboard gear.
Yeah. Okay.
For this.
Yeah, cool.
I don't know that I've got any specific desert island gear. It kind of more generally, along with the chat earlier and with Matt, it's about having good mic choices and particularly ones that suit what you want to do. Dynamic mics with a dark sound, like ribbon mics or hypercardioid mics, are things that just feature in nice mic collections for all the reasons we've just discussed. And like we rely on them. I notice it more when I can't get the correct mic on an instrument, more so than I notice a different mixing console or a different PA system. These things can all be fine with varying choices, but I want the correct microphone on the instrument that we've chosen. That's the thing I won't really compromise on if I can.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll say too, carrying, especially being on stage a lot, carrying around a 58 in your pocket's like a huge tool, just for when lines get weird and like we're always in different countries and patching, and there's our conversation in English, and then there's a conversation going on in whatever the native language is. So having a 58 where I can just run out there and plug it in and talk, and Harrison can tell me what channel is saves us.
Yeah, one with a switch. One with a switch on it, so we can relay two ways. It's a dynamic mic. You can check out output lines as well as lines that, normally for testing stage lines, I'd advocate using a condenser mic because it needs phantom power, and that means you have to check both the legs on a balanced system, whereas the dynamic mic will still work badly on a one-legged system. But the switch dynamic mic you can also use to check return lines that are normally line level, no phantom. You can use that to check, and as Matt says, we can use it to shout to each other when we need direct lines of communication. One with a switch really helps, because you can just pick it up, click it on speak, put it back down. No fuss. You can make up quick shout systems.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's clever.
The SM50 is just...
too.
Sorry?
said the shout boxes are fun too, so you can talk trash to each other.
yeah, that too. But the SM58 is just, as Matt says, is really useful. We use it for voicing out systems or monitors if we need to, because everyone knows the sound of an SM58. We've all used them. It's so influential that actually it shapes our perception of how something should sound.
Yeah,
so it's a good thing. It's a good thing to have one of your own, especially if you're concerned that what you've been supplied that day are fake 58s or broken 58s. It's good to have a fresh one to AB when no, sorry, yours are dead. Throw them away.
Yeah.
It's so useful.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Well, thanks again for your time, guys. Much appreciated, and congratulations on pulling off this mammoth project. That's an incredible success. Sounds amazing. Looks amazing. And, are you guys going on tour in October?
Yes.
Not me.
Okay.
But I am going to Wembley because I want to see. I've booked a ticket. So
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a tour basically running the whole of October and first half of November. So it's six weeks around UK, Europe.
Yeah. Any plans to come to Australia?
I hope so.
Yeah.
It's been 5 years. It's too long.
There was that little pandemic thing that happened, but
yeah.
We'll get out there.
I think it's in the pipeline, but that's a management question. I'm sure they're on it. But last I remember, just the distance and the travel difficulties and like promoter booking uncertainties. They're always the. It's not that nobody wants us to come, and it's not that we don't want to come. There's just factors,
For sure. Yeah. Well, if it happens, it'll be great to catch up again. You guys
Yeah,
back from Melbourne. Yeah, and all the best for the tour, and really appreciate your time.